Morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Today's presentation is on flight simulators with Skip Egdorf and Marc Bonem. We're going to focus on two main types of flight simulators in this presentation. First, I'm going to talk about home systems. In other words, you could have a flight simulator like mine. Something for your home, something you can practice on, train on, and have fun with. I'm not going to talk too much about games and gaming just because I haven't gone there and I really don't know too much about it. I do know that it is a whole huge world. There's millions of gamers out there. Skip is going to talk about flight simulators for the chapter. In other words, how can we use them for young eagles? How can we use them for STEM outreach? How can we use them as a marketing tool to grow the chapter? And possibly even use them for formal training, because some other chapters do that. And then we're going to follow up with a discussion where we can all think about this and talk about it together. Where do we want to go with what we know? So, first of all, what is a flight simulator? Flight simulator is a computer-based system to simulate flying in an airplane. Basically, I'm talking about something in your home, in your office, on a desktop, something like that. There's lots of different kinds of systems, and really, this is a whole universe all by itself. There's also a huge assortment of sophistication and uses and prices. So, what do I need to put together a system for my home? There's a whole bunch of YouTube videos put out there by Sporties and EAA and lots of other people on how to purchase and put together a system. I've put together a list. I have some handouts, and if we run out of handouts, I'll be happy to email it to you at your home. Not a problem. First of all, we need some hardware, of course. We need a yoke or a joystick. Now, some people just get a joystick and do the yaw by twisting it, and that's fine for the gamers. If you're serious about any kind of real training, I strongly recommend you get pedals, because almost every airplane out there has pedals, and chances are that's what you're going to be flying with. You're going to need a CPU with a certain amount of RAM, and yes, you need a gaming card or a graphics card, because this is very heavy graphics usage. Cost, you can scrounge a system for maybe $500. The systems we have here are all scrounged and put together. The hardware is old and obsolete. The CPUs are donated, and we've cobbled it together. I think minimum of $1,000 is more realistic. The more sophistication and realism you want, the higher it goes. You're really limited by your creativity and effort. You can buy components from Sporties and My Pilot Store. I got my screens from Best Buy. Certainly you can get stuff on eBay or Amazon. And you can pick and choose what components you might want for your own system. Or you can buy a whole complete system from a vendor, which is what I did. I knew I'm not an IT guy, and I didn't want to be spending a lot of mental energy. Is this yoke going to work with these pedals? How do I get the software to recognize it? Yada, yada, yada. I wanted something that I could take out of the box, plug in, and it would work. So I paid a little bit more for a vendor setup. There's three main producers of software and others besides that. Again, we're talking about for personal use. There's X-Plane, which some people consider the best one for training because it gives the best simulated aircraft response. In other words, the closest thing to actually flying a real Cessna. Again, this becomes a matter of opinion. There's Microsoft, the 300-pound gorilla. They're kind of famous for their good scenery, and they offer a lot for the gaming world. And then Lockheed actually bought the old original Microsoft software and then built on it. And they're best known for their military aircraft and big airline aircraft. As always, it's a trade-off between cost and capability. I know X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator start at $80, which is pretty reasonable. They all go up in price as you go up in sophistication. But they're all good for training purposes. They're all good for starting out. You may find, as I am finding, that it's a lot easier to deal with hardware than doing it through the screen, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So you might want to buy more stuff for your systems. And as you can see, you can get it. You can get simulated NavCom or a switch bank or gauges. You know, pick and choose what you want. You can also even buy whole consoles that are put together that are just like a Cirrus or a Cessna, or what do you want? An F-16? Yeah, it's out there. You can play with other players. There's a world community out there. So you can hook up with somebody from Manchester or Singapore or both of them at the same time. It's in the software. You can do that. There's also two software packages where you can engage air traffic control. These are real controllers that are either retired or they're doing this as a side job and they get paid for it. It's not a perfect system, but it's a way you can engage this way and get real-world training. There's all sorts of additional downloads for more aircraft, more airports, better scenery. It's there if you want it. We have EFB integration. They all offer that now. I believe that system is integrated with the EFB.
Yeah, I have my running for flight over with
Okay. Again, it's just another area that you can bring into your system to make it more realistic. All the software packages now have a virtual reality option. So you can get the goggles and practice through that. I've never done it. I've read mixed things about it. But it's there if you want it. And AI, well, it's lurking around the corner for everything else. So I'm sure we're going to see it here too. How do you use it? How does it work as a practice tool? You can do almost everything with it. Procedures, maneuvers, drills. I put together a short list. Slow flight, stalls, navigation, airspace, ATC, emergencies, crosswind landings, night flight, flight in bad weather, IFR, which is what I'm doing, GPS, autopilot. You can practice all of this stuff on your home simulator. Yeah, it's good. It's worth it. The IFR, most packages offer basic Cessna, both with steam gauges and with a Garmin 1000 panel. I'm mostly flying with steam gauges with a Garmin 530 because the aircraft I actually fly has steam gauges and a Garmin 530. But I'm also practicing with the glass panel a little bit too because I know, yeah, it's something I need to know. Personal note, there's probably no way in this world that I could ever learn IFR without my home system. Even my instructor says this is going to require a lot of repetition. And I'm an old guy, so I need even more repetition. So I don't do it every day, but almost every day. And I don't think there's any way I could do it without my home system. You can use it to rehearse an upcoming flight. Let's say you want to fly to Denver and you've never flown to Centennial before. So you can fly to Centennial, and yeah, the airport looks pretty much like the real airport. Same VORs, same checkpoints. So you can practice flying someplace you've never been before. My practice list is basically based on the Flight Maneuvers Handbook. I'm a low-hour pilot, so that's good for me. Doesn't mean you have to do it that way. And of course, you want to have fun with the system. It should not be all work and no play. So some of the things I thought of: formation flying, dog fights, just games in general, carrier landings, flying under bridges. You can fly around the pyramids or the Eiffel Tower if you want to do that. It's all really easy and accessible. Okay, this is my system. Basically, yoke with switches, master, etc., lights over here. I bought a separate throttle quadrant because I wanted trim, flaps. These are miscellaneous switches, some of which I've assigned. One's pitot heat, one's brakes. Up here I've got the switches for autopilot because I know I'm going to need to practice that. That's something I'm going to need. A gamer probably doesn't need autopilot. 3 screens, definitely recommend spending a little bit more money for 3 screens. It really makes a difference, and it's not that much more. Pedals, CPU, and the keyboard, and hopefully you're never going to touch the keyboard. You cannot do this on a keyboard, okay? This is a low buck system that met my needs. Didn't spend I spent as little as I could. How's that? This is the system set up for runway 33 at night. Just to show you, this is how I started practicing my VOR, my IFR. But it became clear this was not disorienting enough. So now I'm practicing IFR in the clouds, which is sufficiently disorienting.
Question about
yes.
displays. You mentioned 3. Do you have multiple graphics cards, or you drive?
No, it's from a single graphics card. When I bought the system, I was talking with the vendors, and they asked, "Are you going to be on 1 screen or 3 or what?" And I said 3 screens, and they're just USB ports to the CPU. But again, this is why I went through a vendor, so I wouldn't have to be worrying about these kinds of details. You know, and I know people here in Los Alamos that are really experts in putting these systems together. I'm not. Okay. There's pros and cons. Even my instructor said this is very much a double-edged sword. So I'm going to talk about the good things and the bad things. First of all, cost. That's the biggie. These are way, way, way cheaper than actually renting an airplane with an instructor. I think compared to renting, I paid for my system certainly within 2 weeks, maybe in the first week. Your home system is always available 24/7. If you can't sleep at night, you can come down to your office and practice if that's what you like to do. You don't, pardon me? You don't have to make a reservation. There's no commute to the airport. Okay, even for me, it's half an hour for me to drive to Santa Fe. You don't have to waste time on a checklist unless you want to practice doing your checklists, in which case you can do that. Likewise, there's no wasted time flying to the practice area unless you want to do that. You can set it up for 3-mile final to any runway, or 10-mile final. Or you can save it over a VOR or a checkpoint and keep going to that same place. Which brings me to repeatability. You can practice your crosswind landing over and over and over again until you've got it down. And this is how people use it, and it's really, really great. You can record all your flights. It's not something I do, but I can see how in a student-instructor situation that could be a useful tool. And you're not affected by local weather. So if it's IFR outside, it's always sunny on the computer. On the other hand, you can set it up to any kind of weather you want. If you need to practice at IFR, you can set it up for that. You can set it up to actual weather conditions, actual time of the day, or whatever you want. On X-plane, which is what I use, you can set the winds up at different levels and different strata. And it's a real effective training tool. You can also set up failures, failures of the gauges, structural, the engine, whatever. I had an interesting unplanned failure. I think it was the second or third time I was flying my machine, okay, my simulator, January, and there was weather like this, and I thought, perfect, I'll go fly in real world clouds. And so I'm up in the clouds, maybe 3,000 feet AGL, and the rain's hitting the windshield, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. It's very realistic. And suddenly I start losing power and losing altitude. And I'm pulling back, on the yoke, and, it's not helping. And I jam in the throttle and the mixture. It's not helping, and I'm doing my quick emergency. Okay, check the, et cetera, et cetera. And I, auger into the ground. And the graphics for the crashes are also more realistic than they used to be. It was upsetting. It, put the fear into me. Anybody want to guess why I crashed? Pardon me?
Carpine.
No. Good guess? Okay, icing. It was January. On the runway it wasn't freezing, but up in the clouds was. And it iced up really fast. Faster than I could have done anything about it. So that was a real good lesson. And then I, hit reset, started over. Okay, I'm kind of jumping to the end a little bit. You can log official hours, official training hours, put in your logbook. That's approved by the FAA, but you've got to do it their way, of course. You have to have an aviation training device, that's what they call it, which means pro-level software, which costs about $1,000, a good CPU, and oversight with your instructor. But if you meet their criteria, you got the hours. You can do multiplayer scenarios. There's already lots of courses out there. There's tutorials. You can get a coach, and the coach will come into your system via the software and fly with you and tell you what you're doing right and doing wrong. It's like having another CFI. And the last pro is this won't kill you. Like I said, I iced up, I really did crash and burn, and then I hit reset and started over. So, yeah, that's a good thing. Cons and limitations. It's not the real thing.
Question?
Yes?
So with these remote CFIs, is it possible to use that in a training scenario and actually log time for it?
I believe so, yes. I would guess so. Assuming that your coach is a CFI, and they're out there.
Right.
So
And the system is certified.
And the system is certified. It's certainly possible. Okay, no reason you can't. So the main limitation, it's not the real thing. It will never be the exact same as an airplane. It's a simulation. There's no inertial forces. You don't feel anything when you turn. Okay? It doesn't build muscle memory for any specific kind of aircraft. The dashboard layout may be different. The handling may be different. Your particular airplane, like the Comanche out there, you may not be able to find that. And if you find it, it might be a different version. So it won't be the exact same. There's also a learning curve, just like if you went to a different airplane. You have to learn what the feel of the sim is, and then the transition from the sim to a real plane can be a little tricky. So you have to be aware, yeah, there is a transition. Take that into account when you get into the real cockpit. You will have to adjust the sensitivity or calibrate your system. Most systems are way oversensitive, and you have to dial them back. You may want to leave it oversensitive, so when you get back into the real Cessna, it's a lot easier, maybe, if that works for you, maybe not. And on the sim, no, you can't go to a nice restaurant or a real beach or take friends out. You can practice with friends on the sim, but you don't really go anywhere. Okay, these are some specific limitations that are common to all the software packages that are worth knowing about. The first one is the 10-foot rule. No simulator is accurate below 10 feet altitude. The dynamics of ground effect are just too difficult to model at this point. Maybe in 20 years, yeah. My CFI specifically told me not to practice landings. You know, I can practice anything else or everything else, but not landings, which is kind of a shame because landings is one of the big challenges of learning. And, you know, some people really like doing landings, but there it is. Likewise, taxing is not quite right. It takes this weird technique of kind of punching the pedals. There's a disconnect between the software dynamics for the tail in the air and the software dynamics of your nose wheel. It's just difficult. It's not that great. Stalls and spins, some people complain about it. I've done it. Simulated Cessna 172. It's certainly good enough for my purposes. Certainly good enough to practice. Now, if you're serious about flying an F-16, you really need the dynamics just right, okay, maybe. Some of the controls are difficult, like trim is difficult to use in the simulator. It's not near as good as on a real airplane. It's just not as good. The last two are important. Looking around is real difficult. In the simulator, you have a point of view. But if you want to look down to your fuel shutoff or look to the left to the runway and the pattern, it's difficult to change the point of view. You either have to hit a key on the keyboard or use the hat switch on your yoke, which gets really disorienting really quickly. It's hard to work with. Something you can do in a glance is easy, but doing it on the sim is hard. It takes a lot of neurons. Likewise, adjusting a switch is difficult, whether it's the NavCom or the VOR or altimeter. You have to do it through the mouse. So it takes more brain power, it's a big distraction, and then once you finally got there, you found you're already 15 degrees off course or lost 100 feet of altitude or something like that. It's a big distraction. And that's why people invest in these hardware setups. That's why they get touch screens. Finally, a big limitation is the software will never kill you. You won't have the immediacy and the reality of flying in a real airplane. So it cuts both ways. How to train? Well, there's as many different ways as there are people. The way I train is I use the simulator as a practice tool, not a learning tool. So what I do is I have my lesson with my instructor, I go up and I show him what I can do, and he tells me all the things I'm doing wrong. And then he gives me the assignment for the next lesson, and we'll practice that a couple times. We do it for the first time in a real airplane. Then I come home and I practice it on the simulator, okay, after having done it first in a real airplane. That method was recommended to me. Again, it's not the only way. It's one way, and it happens to be the way I'm doing it. Education and support. There's a whole flight simulator association. They have literally thousands of members. They have a convention, just like Oshkosh. Go to their website. There's a huge amount of stuff there. There's coaches that you can hire. There's online schools, two that I know of. if you get the software from X-Plane, tutorials include, they have a school with the X-Plane company. Also, Sporties and EAA has gotten together and they have their virtual flight academy. So that's out there. You can buy an old edition of the Microsoft Flight Simulator, that's their Steam edition, the X edition. It's $25, and there's a tutorial in there. Again, I've got a list of resources and websites if you want it. And finally, perhaps EAA Chapter 691 will be providing some sort of training in the future. It could happen, but it depends on what we want to do with it, and that brings in Skip. And Skip, it is your presentation. You have the presentation.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm going to go a little bit different direction so we don't cover all the same stuff, but I really want to emphasize what Mark's doing is phenomenal. Most people who are going to get into flight simulation are going to start out using a home system like this for their personal use. That's a really important thing to do and a very valuable thing to do. And Mark's learning a lot about this. If you have questions, if you want to learn things, get together. That's what the chapter is all about. Let's work together on this. My interests have come from sort of a different place. So this presentation is going to be a little bit of telling the story of the last year or so as I got into this. I've played a few games. I remember I had Knights of the Sky and Red Baron back in the old Intel 386 PC days. But haven't done very much with flight simulators. So what I'm going to be doing, my interests have gone in the direction, not so much the personal thing in the home, although that's important and fun. I'm going to be talking about all the other things that maybe the chapter may be able to be doing and see if it perks some interest of people here. The place I really started with this, thinking about it, was back at our last Young Eagles rally. 2 of the 3 Young Eagles I flew told me they'd already flown this sort of thing on their flight simulator at home. One of them mentioned, wouldn't it be neat to have a flight simulator here, boy, for all the kids who are waiting around? Yeah, gee, that might be a way to get kids more, anything we can do to get the Young Eagles more interested and activated is a good thing. I'll have to keep that in mind. And then we started doing the Young Eagles workshops. And I remember Andrew and April laying out the runway out there and teaching the kids how to walk around the pattern and how to give call signs and how to communicate. And the comment came up there, wouldn't it be neat if we also had like a flight simulator where the kids could do that in the flight simulator? Ooh, interesting idea. And we've talked a little bit about how we might use these things in the Young Eagles workshops. The Build and Fly program that Will mentioned actually comes, not a flight simulator like these, but it comes with a little radio controlled flight simulator you use with your computer, and you can fly a radio controlled thing around. So the Build and Fly program has a flight simulator portion. And for our other workshops, like when we're teaching the kids, when we're thinking ahead, it's come up a couple of times. How could we use a flight simulator to assist with this teaching? Now finally, even back when we first got the Dragonflies, one of the things in the back of our mind was, wouldn't it be neat if we had something more like academic research software where we could model the flying characteristics of the Dragonfly, get it accurate enough that maybe we could fly it with the gasoline engine that loses power as you go up in altitude, and then compare it to the proposed electric motor that doesn't lose power as you go up in altitude. Gee, I wonder what we could learn with that. Finally, I will mention, it's come up that you can get FAA certification and use, but it's expensive. I think the chapter up in Colorado Springs actually had a project airplane that they ended up selling and used the money from the project airplane to buy a full-blown FAA certified simulator that they rent time in. And of course, EAA, if you go back to Oshkosh, they've got a simulator now. It costs $35 an hour. and it's an official one you can log time with. I'm not sure if the chapter ends up going in that direction, but it's probably worth mentioning. So a lot of these ideas have floated up in conversation in the last year or so, and the one that really got me, I think Will made the first comment, you know, we have 3 Dragonfly fuselages. A couple of them are pretty good, but one of them, the guy started building it, and with all due respect to whoever he was, I don't know him, he used way too much resin. He was learning how to do the fiberglass. It's about 80 pounds overweight compared to the other fuselages. It will never fly. Why don't we take a big saw and chop it up and make a simulator out of it? We can sit in it and fly it and have fun with it. It's actually a really good idea. But as I thought of that, I was starting to get a little scared. That sounds really complicated. Marc talked about the third-party aftermarkets for doing things like all the switches and the OBS knobs on the VORs and all those things that aren't on the standard little yokes and joysticks like these things. What does it take to make those in something like a real Dragonfly cockpit simulator? Marc did mention using mouse and keyboard controls for this is a complete waste of time. They say you can do it, don't even try. But how do we build more reasonable tools if we're going to look at something like a Dragonfly simulator? So that's a question in my mind. And finally, we did get into how do you do aircraft models? How do you actually build an aerodynamic model of the Dragonfly into one of these simulators so that it's something you can actually do some research and some work on? How do you do a 3D model? Roger, I'm looking at you. How would I do a 3D model of my Taylorcraft and put it into one of these things so that I could see pictures of it flying around? And of course, with the flight dynamics and the aerodynamics. So I was starting to build up 2 things. I was building up a big list of uses for flight simulators beyond the home one. I always want to go back. That home flight simulator is a really important, neat tool. But gee, it sounds like there's lots of other things that the chapter might be interested in exploring with this. So what I ended up with is I was getting scared by this. I started looking and had a whole bunch of questions. What does it mean to do a simulator like the Dragonfly? What does it really mean to sit in it and fly as compared to sitting at a table like this? How ergonomic does it need to be? How do you get in and out of it? What sort of screens do you need? As Marc was talking about, you get out on the internet and look at some of the people who have, this is a hobby. I built a Boeing 747 full-up simulator, and there's 20 screens around, so you can look anywhere in real time. People go in and do 3D printing of control panels and all. It's amazing what some people are doing with this. How might we do that, say, for the Dragonfly? So how ergonomic does it need to be to get in and out and fly it? What screens do you need to see? What controls do you really need, and which ones are optional? Which ones, like the mouse and keyboard, which are easy, which are hard? And so I finally was going, you know, my tendency for these things, when I start having lots of questions about something, for better or worse, my particular tendency is, okay, I'm going to dive in and build one and find out how it works. I need a platform to experiment with this. So I decided to build a simulator. And as I reached that conclusion, I started, okay, what would I be doing if I'm going to build a simulator for my own personal use? This isn't for the chapter or anything. This is because Skip Egdorf wants to find out what flight simulators are all about. I don't know anything about flight simulators, so how do I learn? Well, I needed something simple and relatively inexpensive. I mean, I'm not completely broke. I can spend a little money. But I better watch out, my wife's sitting over there. She'll yell at me if I start buying too much of this stuff. So I had a bunch of old parts sitting out in the hangar and so forth. It'd be nice to use some of those. I really wanted something that was easy to modify, because since I know I don't know anything about flight simulators, I'm going to screw it up. So I want to be able to cut it up, glue some new pieces on, drill some new holes, run some new cables, be able to think, how do I really want to use all this stuff? So I wanted it as a base for modification and experimentation. I wanted to learn from it. And as I started to show people these ideas, and as I was starting to build that guy and show it to people, I started to get the hint that maybe possibly at things like the Young Eagles rallies or some of our workshops or that some of this stuff might actually be useful. So it's turned from just a personal project for my own education and fun to something that maybe the chapter can use. We'll throw the ideas out. So, started development on the simulator. I had in the hangar an old canopy from a wrecked single-place biplane that I was never going to use for anything. It had been sitting there for 25 years, and I just like to collect old things like that. I had fiberglass seat that I had used when I was fitting things to put the seats in my Acrosport. I had a set of the wheels sitting in the hangar. Okay, I could use those. We had a set of controls that Will actually had, and they're the chapter's controls. He contributed those. So I built a plywood box, basically. Its size was determined by the canopy and the seat I had. I wanted to make it relatively mobile, so I thought of it like a big wheelbarrow I could wheel around. That's why I put the wheels on it. It kind of looks like a tail dragger. You know, the wheels are up front and the tail's sitting on the tail skid. Put hardware into it. I used a standard old yoke and rudder pedals because that's what we had at the time. They're old. I think this is about 12 or 15-year-old hardware. I did put a sound system in because I wanted to start experimenting with some of this feedback we're talking about. How do you make a simulator more realistic? I had a couple old computers sitting out in the storage shed that I'd used 10, 15 years ago and I'd since replaced in the house. So I had a few computers I could use, although they are old and low-powered. And one of the things I saw as I started to do some research and look at how things were doing, yeah, people like X-Plane want you to go buy a relatively high-end gaming system with really good modern video cards. I think X-Plane's website has a thing on there that says, well, what sort of computer do I need? And their response is, if it's more than 2 years old, you need to buy a new one. That's on their website. Well, I didn't want to do that, but what some people are doing is if you do a distributed network, you can start to throw lots of little computers at the problem. And so I wanted to explore that. I'm a computer guy. Marc said he's not one. Well, I am one. And so I like to play with computers, and so I figured I would start to use a distributed network. This little one that I built has a master computer that does the flight dynamics, the aerodynamics, the actual flying of the airplane. But it then talks out over this little local network to another computer, which has a pretty good graphics card in it, which is displaying this terrain as we fly, and then a third one, which gives the instrument panel that's sitting there. I wanted to play with these things. Oh, and by the way, it does talk Wi-Fi to my iPad running FlightGear. Yes, John?
So did you have to break it up and distribute it yourself, or those tools?
Well, I'll get to the tools I used in a minute. Okay. It turns out the software I ended up choosing made it fairly easy to do all those things. So yeah, I did it. I put the network together, but the software I'm using has mechanisms in it to do the distributed processing, because it turns out, I'm jumping ahead a little, it turns out it has the tools in it to support this mode of operation. So I feel good, I guessed right. Other people are looking at doing this for large simulators. So I put it together, and while it was still just a plywood box unpainted and all, I was able to experiment a lot. I experimented with the different controls. Where do you put the yoke? I made movable rudder pedals, which turned out to be a really good thing. It has had a couple of 4-foot-tall kids in it, who really like it, by the way. You slide the pedals back. Will has sat in it. Whatever you are, you're about 7'12" or something, I think. and Will fits in it with the rudder pedals. It turns out the seat and the yoke aren't quite as critical. I don't have those moving. I've played around with some different things. But so far that's good. It's been an experimental thing where I could play with those. As Marc mentioned, tuning the controls takes some work. Getting the rudder and elevator and all to be not too sensitive or not oversensitive. And that's limited also by the fact we're using some really old donated stuff. And so these have some old potentiometers and stuff in them rather than more modern rotary encoders and so forth. So we find out that you can't just get the rudder and elevator on this one and copy the numbers onto that one. Even though they're identical hardware, they don't work the same because they're old. It's okay, we're playing with it. And finally, I did go ahead and put paint and finish on it. For people who know me, you know that I have this sort of tendency to get up to where, okay, I've learned a fair bit with this simulator. Squirrel, look at that thing. You know, Will knows that. He's taking advantage of that. I'm working on these simulators and he's going, you've flown RC models. We've got this build and fly. Skip, why don't you come over and do some building boards? Maybe you could help us put the balsa down. He knows I respond to things like that. Okay, so I actually went in and put paint and finish, and I'm really kind of happy with it. I like the stripes I put on the side of it. I think they look kind of cool. But that's odd for me, to actually get it up to where it's relatively finished.
Since you can't see colors.
Well, I can see the reds and the blues. At least I think that bottom's one red. It could be green. I'm not really sure. You guys tell me. So let's talk about the software and the systems I chose a little. The requirements for what I was doing are really very different than what Marc's doing, what home systems will use. I was looking for something which had more of a range of academic use. Because we want to do things like doing modeling of the Dragonfly and stuff in it. So I looked at what does NASA, JPL, some university like Michael Selig's group at the University of Illinois, what do they use when they publish papers that use bits of aerodynamics? I wanted something that would support the distributed systems, because if we're going to build something like the Dragonfly, I don't care how big a computer you get, we're always going to need more. So being able to spread it out amongst multiple computers will be a good thing. I wanted it to be accessible. And I use that word with a little bit of caution. I'm a software guy. I want to dive into the source code and learn how it works. I want to learn how flight simulators work. Not everybody really wants to dive into a million lines of C++. I understand that. But I do. It's fun for me to do. So I wanted something which was available where I could go in and learn and frankly end up modifying. We want to be able to add new control systems and put things like the Dragonfly into it. And finally, there's an issue of the use and licensing. We're now turning into a 501c3 corporation. We're going to be very publicly viewable. I think it's very important that we make sure we're obeying licensing terms and so forth. And one of the things I noticed with X-Plane, for example, and I haven't looked at Microsoft's agreement for Microsoft Flight Simulator, but gee, I've seen a lot of Microsoft licenses. I think I know what it says. But with X-Plane in particular, when you spend that $75 or $80 or whatever it is, you get a license for a single machine in your home for single use. Right on their website, they have a thing that says, if you want to use this to make money, you want to sell time at $35 an hour for a flight simulator. I'm not that worried about that for us. We're not in this for profit. But if you want to use it in public, like say, gee, an EAA Chapter meeting in the terminal building, or a Young Eagles workshop, if you want to use it for multi-people, public, multi-people, if you want to use it on more than one machine, yeah, should go buy X-Plane Pro, which on their website I think retails for $1,200. So there's quite a price jump to going to something which allows the use that the chapter might want to use. So anyway, I was looking for all these things, and the system I ended up with is a system called FlightGear. Really interesting flight simulator. It's what's running on all the systems here. It started in the mid-1990s by a couple of people who were working with NASA and JPL. And NASA at the time had a flight dynamics model they were using for modeling aerodynamics, the stuff they did. And it had some limitations. And these guys wanted to do a new one. So in the mid-1990s, they basically wrote a new flight dynamics model for the sort of things that NASA and JPL do. It was just at that time that the good video cards were starting to appear, and there's a whole separate group that was taking USGS terrain data for the US and doing the smoothing and so you could start to display it on computers. And those things sort of came together, and by the late 1990s, FlightGear was a thing. It was a reasonable simulator. So it's got a 25-year use. It has a large user community out there. It turns out that it's available, as you might see from these guys, in modes similar to Microsoft Flight Simulator and X-Plane. So if you wish, you can go load up a copy on your home system and use it somewhat like X-Plane. I do want to emphasize, if you're doing a home system, Marc listed a whole bunch of advantages to X-Plane in particular. Pay attention to those. We're looking at different requirements for different systems. I kind of like the fact that we're looking at a variety of systems here where we can pick the best system for the correct use when it's appropriate. So anyway, this is licensed under what's known as the GNU General Purpose License, which means it's freely available. I can give you a copy right now if you want me to. You can pass it on. You can modify it. You can do pretty much anything you want with it. Finally, full source code is available to the simulator. It's accessible. I've gone in, I've been exploring into the software. I barely scratched the surface. It's a big system, but it is accessible. So anyway, it is important to note we're not trying to compare FlightGear and X-Plane. They're two different systems for two different purposes. They both could be useful. So I'm kind of glad we're looking at the variety of systems. So what have I learned from building, by the way, I call it 691 Yankee Echo. This is chapter 691, and we're going to use it for young eagles, amongst other things. I was careful not to put an N in front of it. It's not exactly an N number, because somebody may have that out there.
Walk in, Skip, and want to look at this application.
So anyway, good old 691 Yankee Echo over there. What have I learned from putting all this together? The first thing is, I've been surprised actually at all the positive feedback. Kids, I've had a couple of young eagle aged kids come, look at it and sit in it, and they love the thing more than I would have expected. It really feels kind of good. Adults who look at it, flight instructors, they're all going, that's a pretty neat box. Given that I build it as a prototype for my own use to make lots of mistakes on, I'm really kind of happy with how it turned out. It's surprising to me. So thanks to all the people who looked at it. The positive feedback's been wonderful for me. I have learned the ergonomics are important. That little side door I put on it and crawling in and out, the kids do fine with it. For a 70-year-old guy like me, it took a lot of time to learn how to slide my back up the seat and work my way out of it and fix the leg cramp and then fall out to the side. If I build another one, I really need to do a better door. Maybe swing the yoke out of the way, maybe turn the seat. The ergonomics are important. So that one's a little tricky for me to use. I'd like to do a second one that's better. The adjustable rudder pedals really work neatly. That's one of the best early decisions I made. The separate control panel and terrain views are a big advantage. If you fly this thing, these are running the same software in the same scenario of taking off on runway 9 at Los Alamos. Flying this thing, or the X-Plane, where you're in the 172 and the panel covers up a lot, I really like taking off on that, where you take off and you can still see the runway, and for some reason it just seems to work better. I have looked at Marc's system and a few of the others, and having a couple extra screens out to the side so you can just look is a really good thing. It's something I want to play with, but I'm cheap and I haven't been able to afford a couple other big screens yet. We'll see. It turns out the distributed computing is real practical. I've got little computers there running this thing. The newest computer I have on there that does the flight dynamics is a 12-year-old Intel i3, if that means anything to anybody. So using little or older computers in a distributed thing is something that can be done. Yes, John?
So I assume that it's a message passing paradigm?
Yeah. For those who want to be computer geeks, I will be glad to go into any level of the detail you want, but it's using standard. I've got a little network switch up there. They use their Ethernet and they talk to each other using, you know, normal internet communication protocols. And finally, the big thing I get out of that is larger simulators are hard, but they can be achieved. And what I mean by that is, I was right. Figuring out how to do, I already have some controls and I'm starting to play with them at home. I shouldn't say too much because I'm still just learning to do it. But being able to take controls and get them into the computer and have the computer recognize them like the yokes and joysticks and all, that seems to be all there. I need to learn how to put the pieces together, but it's doable. But boy, you do need to do a lot of them if we're going to do something like a Dragonfly. So that's something I'm in the process of learning and picking up. If any of you guys out there are more, control engineer type people, boy, do I want to talk to you. So they can be achieved. I'm confident at this point that we could put together a Dragonfly simulator with maybe a little bit more education and a little bit more teamwork. While I say that, I talk about the lower computers and stuff, I want to give a big thanks to people who have done donations to the chapter for this stuff. We've had some computers donated. Some of them are old and really broken, and I've taken them to recycle. Some of them, yeah, you may need to do a little retrofitting and all, maybe a new graphics card, maybe a new battery on the motherboard, some things like that, but we get them working. These have been donated, the chapter owns them, and I want to give a big thanks to people who have given those. We've been donated a couple sets of the yokes and rudder pedals by people. Thank you guys very much. This lets us play with this stuff. I'm really thankful for it. And we've had a couple of screens and monitors. And again, Roger, one of yours is completely blown out and it goes to recycle, but this one's working. You know, they're old, but they work. So, hey, you guys who have donated stuff, thank you so much. It's really valuable. So, here's what I see that we need. Again, part of lessons learned. Where do I think we need to go forward? There's both hardware and there's collaboration. I've run out of keyboards and mice. I've used up all my spares.
You rejected 5 or 7.
Yeah, that's because you had these old things that still plugged into the old round plugs. I'm trying to just use USB. Yeah, some stuff is just too old. Sorry about that.
You're talking about me now.
And me.
I'm taking this personally.
And me. Computers are always welcome. We're going to need more of them. If you've got a spare computer, my deal will be if I can make it work and it's useful, we'll use it. If not, I can take it to recycle as easily as you can. And the multi-monitor systems, I really want to try playing with some of the extra monitors at some point. I'll get to it.
Is the flat screen TVs work as monitors?
That is a flat screen TV. That's a 32-inch flat screen TV. It's one of the best things you can do. The thing you need to do, right now most of these things have a whole bunch of things in going, hi, you've turned your TV on. Let me try and sell you Disney Plus and Netflix is giving a really good deal. Come on, I just want to watch CNN or something. Give me a break. So yeah, those are flat screen TVs, and yes, they work great. Relatively speaking, for great.
And cheap, dumb. You like cheap, dumb TVs, right?
Cheap, dumb TVs. And Best Buy has some for really cheap, and I'm just trying to decide how I can go buy it without Nolda knowing about it when she sees the credit card bill. The other part is collaboration, and that's where I get sort of the end point of this talk. The EAA chapter works because we work together. How many people have gone over to Roger and said, I'm going to put some fiberglass stuff together. Could you help me with what these layout things are supposed to be like? I've had people come to me, hey, Skip, show me some welding. You know, hey, Will, how do you bend titanium without hitting yourself in the face? You know, things like that. So, the collaboration for the chapter, I think we're at the stage for both Mark and me where we've done our personal stuff for our own personal reasons. But this sounds like it's something which could be useful for a lot of people in the chapter, and I think everybody here can bring some pieces to the table, work together, and build something much bigger than any one person could. That's what an EAA chapter is all about. So, people who are into hardware, boy, I could use some help. I'm more a software person. If you want to dig into the software, like how does the networking work, I'm your guy. I'm a software guy. That's my bread and butter. I love this stuff. Getting our group of people together, working as a chapter, I think we can have some really interesting little working groups and bowl sessions and sitting in the hangar drinking beer, talking about flight simulators and things like that. So those are the two main things that I see us needing, some hardware and some collaboration. So here, last slide basically. In the future, question for you guys, what should our chapter be doing with flight simulators? And more importantly, what do each of you want to do? Now I've got a list of bullet items here that I've talked about a bit and that Marc's talked about a bit. When we talked about them, every person in here probably had some point, probably different points, where you got a little bit of tickle down here in the solar plexus or between your shoulder blades. Ooh, wait, that sounds fun. I could do that. So what I'd like to do is, looking at sort of my little bullet list of some of the things I talked about, I'd kind of like to get a show of hands here. Go through this list, and I'm not asking for anyone to volunteer. Pierre, don't take any notes. Will, turn around, close your eyes. Nobody's volunteering for anything. I'm just interested in which of these topics maybe were of interest to people. Maybe none, maybe a lot. I'm kind of curious. Doing things like using the simulator as a marketing tool with the Young Eagles and stuff. How many people were a bit interested, thought that might be a good idea? You know? Doing the desktop simulators with Young Eagles workshops, or desktop simulators as a home system, as Marc talked about. Just using these. Who might be interested in having a system like that? And maybe figuring out how to use it with Young Eagles. How about the RC model stuff, the build and fly? You know, doing this and having the little model airplane flipping around and crashing. Anybody interested in the models? Yeah. The build and fly stuff might be an interesting place to work.
Skip, there you're talking about the computer simulator of the RC.
Yeah, this is the computer simulator. It's a little box, and and it plugs into the computer, just like these guys plug into the computer, but instead of having a 172 up there, you've got the Cadet flipping around and going upside down and spiraling into the ground and turning into balsa sawdust. That's the way I fly it anyway.
Hopefully that helps you avoid turning cadets.
Like Marc talked about, crashing out of the clouds with ice. It's a useful thing for a simulator to do. How about in the software realm, not just maybe playing with a million lines of C++, but the people who are looking at doing the terrain. If you've looked at the flight simulators we had going here, an X-Plane does the same thing. They start out with the USGS data for the US, which are on grid squares of about 200 meters with elevation and some things about what trees and stuff are on them. And then the graphics cards smooth those into rounded hills. So if you notice, like April, you were flying off runway 9 here, the hills are sort of in the right place, but they're all just rounded. They're not our beautiful big cliffs. You can go fly out to Black Mesa and it's this little rounded hump, you know, out on the... So you can do a lot with the terrain. You can add buildings. Notice none of the airports, Santa Fe in these things is pretty much blank. Los Alamos. There may be a few buildings people have added, but they don't really look real. You can take this scenery up and make it almost photorealistic. And of course, adding aircraft. I fully intend to dive into that part. I haven't yet, but I fully intend to put both the Taylorcraft and the Comanche into the database as aircraft. They don't have them there. April.
So you're basically talking about building terrain with layers in GIS?
Yes. Yes. Let's get in here and let's put the buildings onto the airport and put them into the flight simulator. So when you take off on runway 9, there's more than just the runway there. Let's go put, you know, instead of just having a generic, the USGS map says there's a town here. And so it puts generic concrete buildings around, like in a city. Go put some real roads in. Yes?
You could put a yellow Beechcraft on the field so that another plane can crash into it.
That's true. Now that's an important mark to have, is a yellow Beechcraft on the field is an important piece for the simulator to know about.
I'll tell you what would really be good is people can see what it's like if you actually try to take off on runway 27.
Yeah.
Because those houses get really close with, you know, 172.
We need to have some real houses there to do that. So doing the hardware expansion then, oh, software. Who might be interested in looking at the software? Not maybe the code, maybe the networking, but also things like terrain, buildings, aircraft. Hardware expansion. The first thing I noticed, you talked about flying off runway 33 and doing the VOR approach, and how hard it is to take the mouse and go over and put it on the Omni selector and you click it and try and get the thing to turn. It's practically, so one of the first things I want to do is a little knob, like you can buy, and what does it take to actually hook it into the software, and when I turn the knob, the OBS on the graphics screen changes. I think I know all the pieces, I just need to get them together and get the details right. But doing hardware expansion like that will be necessary if we're going to approach doing a realistic thing of the Dragonfly. Because it's full of knobs and switches and stuff that I don't think there's going to be a commercial box out there that looks like the Dragonfly panel. So how about hardware? People interested in doing that sort of stuff. And finally, Will, you've got a chainsaw. Let's take the Dragonfly fuselage and start cutting it up and maybe build a second generation to 691 Yankee Echo. How many people would be interested in taking and fixing a Dragonfly fuselage? That could be a fun project for us. So there is interest here. John?
So in principle, if you did something like that, you could either hang it or put it on hydraulic actuators and actually move it.
We've had a couple of suggestions for that. I think a lot of people, when they say, let's just make it's like that guy, it sits there. Right. And I at least put sound in. I think the sound in that thing added a lot, the engine sound and stuff. I've been thinking about getting something like a little vacuum cleaner motor or something and putting it under the seat and making the whole thing shake while the motor's going. You know, there are things like that we can do. And certainly, even back into World War II to the old Link trainers, you'd pull back on it and the thing would be doing this clumsily and badly with the technology they had. But it does add something to it. So the official term for that is haptic feedback, I believe. How do we do that? Hydraulic actuators, servo motors, doing things like force feedback on the yoke and having it tied into the flight dynamics so as your airplane speeds up, you have more force on the ailerons. Mark?
They do sell a higher level of yokes with the force feedback.
Yeah. I have an old Logitech force feedback joystick I used back in the Red Baron days. And it was amazing to me here I am in this Spitfire shooting at the bad things over the English Channel, and it does have force on it, and when I pulled the trigger, the thing shook with the machine guns. Even at that immature age, it added a lot. So yeah, doing the Dragonfly, I think we want to look first at, can we just get a control panel? Can we leave some little stub wings on so the canard has pieces of the control and the wing has pieces of the ailerons, so when we move things, you can actually see controls move? But then it's not unreasonable to plan ahead and say, let's put it up on a couple of maybe some hydraulic things that when you pull back on the stick, the thing lifts up. Those are all approachable things. I think I had earlier on my slide, this is hard, but it's approachable. We can learn how to do that. So in any case, I would like to thank all you guys for this. I hope we planted some seeds. And as those seeds about flight simulators grow, if you have questions, if you have ideas, if you just want to sit around and, talk about how flight simulators work, get in touch with Mark, get in touch with me. Because I think we're at the stage where instead of just having a few individuals working on this, we need to start looking at building the community. And at this, I think I'll say thanks for the support from you guys. We can probably end the official presentation here. And if we want to keep talking about flight simulators, or maybe you guys come up and try the desktop ones or 691 Yankee Echo, we'll be glad to sit and help talking you through how the things work. So thank you very much.